You think you're tough? You wouldn't survive 24 hours in the Viking Age. Modern life softens nearly everything. We live longer, eat better, and survive injuries that would have been fatal 1,000 years ago. But in the Viking Age, just staying alive was a daily struggle. Most people didn't make it past childhood. If you were born, there was a good chance you'd die before age 7. If you survived that, you faced disease without medicine, food shortages, violence, and constant physical labor in one of the harshest climates in Europe. This wasn't a world of heroic raids and endless feasts. It was a world where childbirth could kill you, infections spread fast, and the sea could swallow your entire crew. In this video, we're going to look at the real reasons you wouldn't last even a single day in the Viking Age. Surviving your first 24 hours in the Viking Age started with being born alive. That alone was never guaranteed. Childbirth was one of the most dangerous moments in a woman's life, and infants faced overwhelming odds. Nearly half of all Viking children died before the age of 7. Infection, cold exposure, malnutrition, or complications during birth claimed many within days. For mothers, fatal bleeding, infection, or obstructed labor were common and often untreatable. Midwives relied on experience and herbal remedies, but without sterilization or surgical tools, even minor complications could turn deadly. If you did survive birth, the struggle continued immediately. Newborns were swaddled and kept near the hearth to stay warm, but poor ventilation made respiratory infections likely. The longhouse was crowded, smoky, and shared by up to 30 people, including animals in winter. Clean water was limited. Disease spreads quickly. Fevers, dysentery, parasitic infections, and pneumonia were frequent killers in early childhood. Vaccines and antibiotics didn't exist. Parents did what they could with poultices, teas, and prayers. But nature decided who lived. By age 5, a child was already expected to help. There was no schooling, no protected time for play. Children gathered firewood, carried water, tended livestock, and mimicked the labor of adults. Accidents were common, and any injury that broke the skin risked infection. Cuts, burns, broken bones, and animal bites could be fatal if they became infected. Food was limited and not always consistent. Poor harvests meant children might go hungry for days at a time. Malnutrition weakened the immune system, making every illness more dangerous. Even in the best of years, children lived close to danger, disease, and death. For a modern person, even reaching adulthood in the Viking Age would be a challenge. Even outside of warfare, the Viking Age was physically brutal. Most people worked with their hands from dawn until dusk. That meant chopping wood, hauling stones, repairing tools, tending livestock, and maintaining farms in often frozen or uneven terrain. Work injuries were common. A fall, a bad cut, or an accident with a blade could lead to permanent damage or death. There were no hospitals. There were no trained surgeons. A deep wound might be rinsed with herbs and bandaged with cloth, but if it got infected, there was little anyone could do. In many cases, people simply waited to see if the body could fight it off. Archaeological evidence shows that many people lived with broken bones that never healed properly, dislocated joints, worn-out spines, and signs of chronic arthritis even in their 20s and 30s. This kind of pain was constant and untreated. There were no painkillers or antibiotics, and no safety equipment to soften the blow of an accident. Animals added another layer of danger. Cattle, pigs, and horses were part of daily life, but handling them could result in kicks, bites, or trampling. Injuries from livestock could be as dangerous as those from weapons, and if the damage wasn't fatal, it still meant days or weeks of limited movement in a society that depended on every able-bodied person pulling their weight. Surviving in the Viking Age wasn't just about avoiding battle. You could die from slipping while hauling a bucket, or bleed out from a tool accident. Even the most ordinary tasks came with extraordinary risk. Eating in the Viking Age was about survival, not satisfaction. Most meals were based on what could be grown or preserved locally, and that depended heavily on the weather, the soil, and the season. The diet relied on hearty grains like barley, rye, and oats, as well as root vegetables, dairy, and dried or salted meat. In good years, the food was simple but sufficient. In bad years, people went hungry. Famine was a real threat. The growing season in Scandinavia was short, and even one poor harvest could mean a winter of food shortages. Without modern storage or supply systems, entire communities could suffer if crops failed or game became scarce. Food was rationed, meals were repetitive. Malnutrition weakened the body and made people more vulnerable to illness and infection. Protein sources like fish and livestock were important, but not always available. Fishing required time, labor, and access to water, while raising animals came with risk, cost, and the need for space and feed. Most households didn't eat meat daily. A simple stew with a handful of vegetables and grain might be stretched across multiple meals. There were no supplements, no vitamins, and no reliable way to correct dietary imbalances. Children often suffered from stunted growth. Adults showed signs of joint degeneration and early tooth loss. Physical labor burned thousands of calories, and cold temperatures drained energy even faster. People needed to eat more than they could always access. Even if you weren't starving, you were often underfed, especially in winter. Surviving the Viking Age meant working constantly to secure food, knowing that a single storm or frost could leave you with nothing. For someone used to modern convenience, that level of scarcity would be a daily shock. Living in the Viking Age meant accepting that violence could erupt at any time, not just during war or raids. Viking society was built around a strict code of honor. Reputation mattered more than law, and insults were taken seriously. Now, a public challenge, a stolen item, or even a perceived slight could lead to bloodshed. Without a centralized legal system, justice was handled locally through assemblies like the Thing. Disputes were settled by negotiation, fines, or combat. If a case couldn't be resolved, individuals or families might seek revenge through personal feud. In some cases, a person could be declared an outlaw, stripped of legal protection, and hunted by anyone who wished to kill them. Duels, known as home gangs, were an accepted way to settle conflict. Participants fought with real weapons and sometimes to the death. Even if one survived, serious injury was likely, and if the loser had family, the feud often continued. This level of threat extended beyond warriors. Farmers, traders, and laborers all had to understand the risks of conflict. Violence wasn't limited to battlefield encounters. It could happen at home, in the market, or along the road. There was no reliable authority to call for help. Survival often depended on alliances, reputation, and the ability to defend yourself. Some wounds were from war, others were from ambushes, feuds, or brawls. In the Viking world, strength wasn't just respected, it was required. If you couldn't defend your name, your property, or your life, no one else was responsible for doing it for you. For most modern people, that kind of constant tension would be overwhelming. In the Viking Age, it was normal. The Viking Age was not just brutal because of violence or disease. The land itself was a challenge. Scandinavia's winters were long, dark, and cold, with snow covering the ground for months and freezing temperatures making every task harder. There was no central heating, no thermal insulation, and no warm showers. Fires burned constantly in longhouses, but heat was uneven, and smoke filled the room. Exposure to cold, especially during outdoor labor, could lead to frostbite, respiratory illness, or death. Daily life demanded physical effort. People cured forests, hauled stones, built homes, and maintained farmland with basic tools. Even domestic chores were physically intense. Women carried water, processed wool, cooked over open fires, and preserved food for winter. The body was used constantly, and rest was rare. Skeletal remains show signs of worn joints, compressed spines, and arthritis, even in young adults. Then there was the sea. Viking culture depended on it for trade, travel, and raiding. But sea voyages were dangerous and unpredictable. Long ships were fast and flexible, but they offered little protection in storms. Navigation relied on experience, memory, and natural signs, like the stars or bird patterns. There were no maps, no compasses, and no safety protocols. Capsizing, getting lost, or running aground could mean drowning far from land, with no chance of rescue. Even experienced crews faced constant risk. Cold winds, freezing water, and lack of shelter made hypothermia a real threat. Injuries during travel, crushed limbs, falls, or burns, were difficult to treat on board. And if someone died at sea, they were gone for good. Surviving the Viking world meant enduring physical stress from all directions. The Viking Age wasn't just difficult, it was deadly. Most people didn't live long, and those who did carried the weight of injury, hunger, cold, and loss. You faced danger from the moment you were born. Illness, violence, harsh weather, and backbreaking labor were part of everyday life. There were no hospitals, no legal protection, no second chances. Survival meant being tough, smart, and lucky, all at once. This is the reality behind the legends, not the heroic stories, but the brutal facts of daily life. If you want more raw and unfiltered history, subscribe now and stay with us for the next episode. Because the past wasn't just dramatic, it was unforgiving.